Hey everyone, welcome to this week's bonus episode. As I'm recording this, the coalition of Syrian fighters continue to liberate large swaths of Syria to the point where the Kremlin has ordered Russian citizens to leave the country. They're closing in on Damascus, and if Damascus should fall to this coalition rebel group, then it's over. It's over for Assad. And what's left is Russia's military base on the Mediterranean, which it uses to launch its rape and pillage of several African nations. Will the Russians get to stay? Will the rebel alliance push out the Russians too? What's going to happen? Russia spread very thin. So is Iran. Interesting times. We will continue to follow this. An update for our Gaslit Nation listeners. At this Monday's political salon will start at 4 p.m. as usual. And that's your chance to contribute comments for the historical record to be preserved in our video recording to be posted on Patreon. Then at 4:30 p.m., we're going to be joined by a special guest for a live taping interview for you to ask your questions about influencers, influential warfare, like the influence campaigns, and namely just the ins and outs of disinformation warfare, how it works, and ways to fight back. That guest is Dr. Emma Bryant, a British scholar and academic researcher on media, contemporary propaganda, surveillance, and information warfare. She was involved in exposing the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal. Dr. Emma Bryant is an associate professor of news and political communication at Monash University in Australia, and she is a co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of the Influence Industry, which features a chapter on law warfare or lawfare written by my sister, Alexandra Chalupa. And that chapter features the dark arts of Paul Manafort, the Kremlin's longtime operative in Ukraine who brought Trump to power in 2016, working for free because he was working to pay off some debt to Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. It's all been documented. All right, to join that conversation with Dr. Emma Bryant, who herself has been targeted by Russian harassment operations, be sure to be a member of the Gaslit Nation Patreon community at patreon.com/gaslit. Discounted annual memberships are available. And if you are already a member, you can give the gift of Gaslit Nation a free membership this holiday season. And if you're not a member, you can try it for free. We offer free subscription trials. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We're going to do wonderful things together in 2025 and turn our rage and despair into important seeds of change. This is going to be some of the most productive years of our lives. Dream big for yourselves, dream big for our country. Now, Gaslit Nation launched a Blue Sky starter pack to find other Gaslit Nation listeners. Drop your handle in the victory chat on Patreon. I'll add you to our Blue Sky starter pack so Gaslit Nation listeners can rebuild together on Blue Sky and get the hell off of Twitter once and for all. And if you need a shot of courage, listen to my interview that came out this week on Politics Girl. Here is an incredibly important update and lesson for us all here in the US. On Sunday, December 8th, Romanians were supposed to go to the polls to vote for their president. But then this happened. Romania's Ministry of Foreign Affairs dropped a bombshell on Thursday, which very much mirrors how Donald Trump and MAGA stole our own election here in the US in 2024 and 2016. I want to make clear Gaslit Nation ran episodes leading up to the November election in the US warning that MAGA was openly trying to steal it and was openly trying to tilt the scales in this very close election. And Merrick Garland and the DOJ were doing nothing. And that MAGA's operation directly came out of their highly illegal and litigated crimes to attempt to overthrow the will of the people in 2020. That failed coup was a dress rehearsal for the successful one that brought Trump to power by a very narrow margin in 2024. Why was it so narrow? Well, if they stole the White House, why didn't they steal more Senate and House seats? That's simple. As the prominent American civil society group free speech for people, which we just had on the show, warned for years MAGA had access to voter data that can change tabulation, how the votes are counted. If they have access to this data and can change the actual vote count, they would want to use this discreetly just for the president and not for a resounding victory in the Senate and House. This same sort of discretion was used when the British cracked the code of the Nazi Enigma machine. The Allies had to be discreet in how they responded to the Nazi codes they could read for themselves, but they couldn't act on everything, or else the Nazis would know their code was broken by the Allies, and then they would change the code, and the Allies would be in the dark again. That's what I think happened with MAGA this election. They had to be selective to avoid being caught. I do not believe this was an honest and fair election because I spent this year documenting all the ways they were trying to steal it in plain sight. And yes, I also covered all the racism and the misogyny and the structural inequalities that also impacted the vote. The fact that the far right dominates in the information space, turning it into a disinformation prison. The fact that there's voter suppression, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the MAGA PAC Supreme Court and Bush's appointees like John Roberts. I Citizens United. I know all of the structural inequalities, the horrible imbalance that we're up against. The fact that gerrymandering in this country is such a crime that the UN issued an emergency report on it. I'm very well aware of all these factors, and they all contribute to this extremely close election. And with this election so close, MAGA threw all the crimes they could at it to tilt these very close scales. Elon Musk was bribing voters in plain sight. Like a judge dragged him in for that. And then what Brian Kemp was doing in Georgia, we had a whole episode on it. And I also warned in the lead up to the election, the Democratic Party is not going to save us. No one's coming to save us. Because why? The Democrats are too cowardly and complacent to protect us. And they take from the same donors as the Republican establishment. So the Democrats are always trying to negotiate in good faith with these bad faith actors to be behaved for their corporate donor class that has them on a tight leash. And so they're basically bought off and they're not going to fight tooth and nail. God forbid they be labeled socialists for fighting for our democracy. They're going to be labeled whatever. Doesn't matter what they do, they'll still be labeled. But that's the Democratic Party. They pre-surrender. And so it's on us. It's on us. And if you're feeling demoralized by this, if you're feeling that learned helplessness, the apathy creep in, I'm telling you, we're going to build our way out of this because we have no other choice. We're going to follow the Ukrainians, follow the Georgians, follow the Romanians, follow the South Koreans, and follow a strict philosophy of self-reliance, of grassroots building. We are going to be a grassroots phoenix rising from these ashes. We will talk more about strategies to protect the vote in the months ahead because we still have a lot of power to leverage. So stay tuned for those conversations. We may have been abandoned a long time ago, but we're not abandoning each other. And that's what I want you to take away from all this. Now, back to Romania and lessons for us. The Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs made this announcement on Thursday, laying out how Russia is openly trying to do to them what they just successfully did to us here in the US. And I'll read from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania on social media now. Romanian authorities took the decision to declassify and release relevant intelligence reports on malign foreign operations, including illegal financing, digital campaign amplification, and cyber attacks targeting the presidential elections in Romania. The declassified reports showed unprecedented and significant foreign interference aimed at democratic institutions and processes. They are part of a continuous attempt to undermine Romania's firm commitment to Euro-Atlantic values and our membership in the EU and NATO. Romanian authorities are investigating this ongoing influence attempt. We informed our allies and will take all the necessary steps to protect our democracy, national security, and sovereignty. Romania remains committed to safeguarding its democratic institutions and processes. Romania putting America's DOJ and FBI and CIA to shame, as well as our courts and the Democratic Party establishment. Good for you, Romania. Good for you. All right. So what Romania just described, these influence operations, that's what Monday's guest Dr. Emma Bryant specializes in, so we can speak with her about that in our live taping at Monday Salon. Again, bring your comments, your questions, your events as normal for the Monday Salon. We're going to kick off with that at 4 p.m. And then at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, Dr. Emma Bryant will join us to share the ins and outs of how these operations work and what can be done about them. All right, so Romania was supposed to vote for president this Sunday following a first round vote where the Kremlin's candidate came out of nowhere to win that first round and to head into these runoffs against a strongly pro-democratic, pro-EU, pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine candidate, a woman. One of the country's most respected journalists called that surprise Kremlin dark horse victory a Russian invasion of Romania. But now a Romanian court has stopped the presidential election for this Sunday and ordered that the presidential election start over again. A reset. Wouldn't that be nice? A reset. So there's going to be another election, and the two winners will then face each other in a runoff. Pretty amazing, and ties into what we just saw in South Korea, where the people, including unions and opposition leaders, put their bodies on the line to stop a coup against their democracy, carried out by a far right leader in the middle of the night. Opposition leaders literally held up fire extinguishers in a doorway, barricading it with their bodies and these fire extinguishers to keep the military at the door from disrupting their legal political process to vote down martial law. And now that right wing corrupt wannabe dictator faces impeachment, and so much more is coming to light about his vindictive hit list against his enemies, including in his own party. Sound familiar? Why are Romanians and South Koreans fighting back in bold ways while Americans remain complacent, especially in the Democratic Party establishment? It's simple. Romanians and South Koreans have suffered greatly in the 20th century. Rampant corruption and dictatorship are very recent memories on their soil, as well as war. They've had to endure and fight like hell in recent decades to come out of that mass trauma, which still lives in their families, in their told and untold history. That trauma of dictatorship and rampant corruption and war going back several decades is a powerful motivator. Non white Americans know this kind of trauma very well, which is why they reliably vote against Republicans and are on the front lines of organizing to protect our democracy. I am concerned that many white Americans, especially in our institutions, will not reach that level of motivation until they too suffer decades of trauma on their own soil and see that, yes, it can happen here. The rest of us can organize together to ensure it never gets to that, but it may, because that's what Trump promised. That's what he and Elon ran on: pain and corruption and handing our country over to the Kremlin. You see it now. David Sachs, one of the biggest Kremlin mouthpieces on Twitter, on the stage of the Republican convention, has just been given a major appointment in the White House. He's overseeing tech and science. That's an extremely influential post. And think about it, as I've recorded on this show for years, the Kremlin uses quote unquote collaborative innovation to seed their corruption, giving all this money to MIT and Silicon Valley so they can get a stronger foothold here. The FBI rang the alarm about that. And a lot of these guys got sanctioned and pushed out. And now the welcome mat is being laid out again. The Kremlin is going to re enter the White House in this new administration. They're making that extremely clear. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who's a big fan of RT and is Hillary Clinton called her rightfully out as a disruptor candidate, and on it goes. Scary times ahead, but we have a plan to get through it. We're going to keep our heads focused and do the damn work that is needed of us in this moment. It's our turn now to be the greatest generation, and we're going to do it together. Now, on that note, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in the U.S. released an unclassified report that the U.S. intelligence community, in their work on Havana syndrome, the findings increasingly point to a foreign adversary being behind Havana syndrome, which had reportedly over 1,000 victims, mostly in US intelligence, law enforcement, that are charged with standing up to Russia and China. As Gaslit Nation has been pointing out for years, yes, this is what's happening. It's pretty obvious. I'll link to that coverage in the show notes for this episode. I wanted just to mention that because that's also some big breaking news that came out this week. And it's interesting to see the US government pushing things like this out, including releasing $50 billion of seized Russian oligarch money to Ukraine, doing nearly $1 billion more of military support for Ukraine, shoving all this stuff out the door before the Kremlin takes over the White House. That's what the Democrats are finally doing. All this stuff they could have done years ago. But here we are. All right, now let's answer some questions from our listeners at the Democracy Defender level and higher. Thank you to you all. You shape our show. The first question is from Thomas or Toma. Toma, I don't know. I'm coming at this from a European angle. Thomas. Okay, and so Toma or Thomas writes, if or when things become dire during the next 4 years, perhaps within the first 6 months of next year, 2025, how many of us do you predict or expect will submit to the changes that will take place without a sound of protest? I imagine many MAGA faithful will do so because it's their side in charge. But I wonder about the apolitical and people who don't follow politics at all, as well as those who are paying attention. I suspect in such events and people's responses to them will divide people, friends, families, even more. All right, so that's a great question. It doesn't take all of us to rise up and stop this. It just takes a lot of us. And so that's one thing. 1,000 people can make a massive difference in what happens next and stopping it and slowing it down and giving us a fighting chance. We know that from studying resistance movements. And so doing nothing and being paralyzed by fear and obeying in advance is the greatest danger. They ran a psyops against us all election with, with that talk of shooting Liz Cheney and being a dictator from day one. That was all demoralization. That was all Trump telling his base, I'm a fighter. I will do whatever it takes to fight for you, something that a Democratic base never hears. so, and being a fighter. What it does to the opponents, it demoralizes them. It puts a seed of fear and doubt in their minds. And then they curl up in a ball and they're just like, oh gosh, he's going to be at my doorstep to shoot me. So it's like, all of us need to shake ourselves off and uh, fight like hell for our country because or else it's going to be Venezuela here. Doing nothing is the greatest danger because that's MAGA's green light to keep going. Russia and MAGA will not stop unless they are stopped. People are less enthused now about marching like they were in 2016 because back then they believed in their institutions. Many people believed Robert Mueller would save them. Hipsters in New York City wore t-shirts with Robert Mueller's face emblazoned on them. AG of Mueller, she wrote, got a full-blown Robert Mueller tattoo. Robert Mueller was a folk hero until he wasn't, and people learned the depressing truth that Gaslit Nation was correct in warning Robert Mueller will not save you. In fact, Robert Mueller is close family friends with GOP cover-up king Bill Barr, and Merrick Garland, our current attorney general, is just a social climber, more concerned about his prestigious career and protecting the status quo, including the revolving door of corruption in Washington, D.C., that allowed Russian mafia backed MAGA to flourish. So, with our institutions being so rotted from within and complicit and complacent, who are people marching for? Who are they making that statement for? Who are they speaking out to help them, to join them? That level of learned helplessness and apathy is dangerous. It's what undermined the Russian opposition. The Russian opposition gave up, they obeyed in advance. Americans have to dust themselves off and use every tool still available in our arsenal to leverage our power. We still have a lot of power left. We, the people, are the sand in the gears of fascism. We will slow them down and stop them. Gaslit Nation is updating our action guide for these times, and it's going to be on us to remain vigilant, to remain active, and refuse to give up our power. We have far more power than we realize. Until the all new action guide gets released, listen to my fired up interview on Politics Girl. In the meantime, I'll link to it in the show notes. I outline a lot of strategies there. Brian C. writes, how can we, the people in the US, stop media malpractice? Examples of media malpractice include outright lying and gaslighting by the right wing propaganda machine, and cowardice like access journalism by mainstream media. I can watch British media figures do interviews and hold powerful people accountable and challenge their lies. American media figures seem like completely spineless wimps who refuse to challenge the powerful. Is there anything the average citizen can do to work against these dynamics? And in response to Brian's comment, someone named Reichenitz wrote, also wondering, I briefly worked in nonprofit journalism, and peeking behind the curtain of that industry, it's not as pure as I had hoped. Well, my comment on that is when it comes to nonprofit journalism, no one can beat ProPublica. They are excellent and they've been doing extraordinary work, and they're a group worth supporting. All right, so now to Brian's points, like how do we fight back against media malpractice? The average citizen can write op-eds to local newspapers, fact checking terrible media coverage by that site or a related site, and provide their own fact checked context to these stories that are not being covered or are covered in the wrong way, thanks to crimes of access journalism. We can boycott the companies of the oligarchs that own our media. We can protest at their offices. Gaslit Nation covered a protest of Rise and Resist at the New York Times office, where that group was handing out flyers to staffers entering the New York Times building, warning them of the dangers of MAGA fascism with recommendations from experts on how to cover it as a journalist, basically reminding them how journalism works, how you're supposed to speak truth to power, not be on the side of power. Anyone can join the excellent group, the Media and Democracy Project, which organizes, it's a wonderful grassroots engine to hold American media accountable. They're going after Fox News's broadcast license for their violations there. They have a lawyer working with them on that. And we can uplift and amplify the good journalists out there, including the ones in mainstream newsrooms, and show them that the public has their back. And that matters for a lot. So we can make a list of the Walter Durantes out there who we need to fact check and call out. And we can also make a list of the Gareth Joneses out there who are practicing journalism. And we can call out one and support the other. And that is going to be important in the years ahead. Laura writes, I was unsettled this Thanksgiving when my 34-year-old sister, who has never been into conspiracy theories before, started rattling off conspiracies related to the P. Diddy trial, who was out of the country to evade justice but involved. She was never into celeb gossip before, but had all these theories about J-Lo. None of this was overtly political, but she also mentioned the Illuminati. Since Thursday, I've been trying to figure out what she is watching or consuming to get these ideas. I am bringing it up with her in person, but I wanted to be prepared. Has anyone encountered this? And is there any reporting on Puff Daddy trial or sex offenses being linked to other wider conspiracies? Is my sister being courted by QAnon? I can't stress enough how out of character this is for her. And in response to Laura's comment, Rio Nitz, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Rionitz writes, she is watching interviews with Jaguar Wright. I watched one at the beginning of this drama and quickly came to the conclusion that while some of what she says is true, she is mostly speaking nonsense. Yes, there are probably many criminals in Hollywood who participated in or covered up Diddy's crimes. Yes, Cat Williams and 50 Cent also said this in a believably non crazy way. But maybe ask your sister, how does worrying about this impact her life? Is it entertainment or is she experiencing stress from it? What does she expect will happen? And will it hurt her personally? Hopefully, she'll just move on when she realizes it's not her problem. Yes, so great points in that comment. So what this sort of this disinformation that's coming out of this very real crime by P Diddy and others is also being used to tarnish Kamala Harris as this Hollywood insider and being mobbed up with these people and being part of this QAnon Illuminati, right? And they do it to Chuck Schumer. QAnon is alive and well. It's still being used. There's all sorts of fake images that are floating out there that are horrible, that are basically putting a target on the heads of Democratic leaders in Congress and so on. And so yeah, these crimes themselves are extremely shocking. The truth itself is shocking. And yes, some mainstream figures are getting wrapped up in this and exposed as well. Same happened with Harvey Weinstein. And then people are just so shocked and so scared by these revelations that these bad actors come in with their own bots And keep in mind, bot farms aren't just about hundreds of bots, thousands of bots. We're talking millions of bots. That's how many bots, millions of bots were used on Twitter to influence the Romanian election, to bring a Kremlin candidate a heartbeat away from becoming president of Romania in a hostile Kremlin takeover of Romania's democracy, right? So we're talking millions of bots. So when these real life horror stories like P. Diddy, Harvey Weinstein strike, the bots come in, and also the conspiracy industrial complex, people that make money by being extreme online, they come in too to cash in and build up their subscriber base and their ad revenue. And it becomes this perfect storm. And yes, these political actors are taking advantage of this by smearing Kamala and others. This happens in the spiritual space. This happens in the self-improvement space. This happens in the parenting space. It happens anywhere there exists any community. It's very easy to get sucked into that rabbit hole. That's why people need to have media literacy, and they need to set clean, firm boundaries, and they need to watch where their news intake comes from and treat it just like organic fruits and vegetables. You don't want to be eating junk food all the time, just like you don't want to be consuming this junk all the time. All right. So let's end with a question from Jacob. I'm wondering how easily mass detention camps could become slave labor camps under the 13th Amendment, and then from slave labor camps to death camps. I answer your question, Jacob, in this discussion with Terrell Starr of the Black Diplomats podcast and Substack on what Trump's Nazi immigration plans will lead to in America if we don't stop them. And remember, they're going to be testing us. So we have to speak out. We have to make our phone calls to elected officials. We have to have our voices raised on social media. We have to take to the streets. Yes, we do have to protest, and we have to stop them. We have to slow them down. They're going to be testing us in these coming months to see what they can get away with. So we talk about your question in this discussion, including whether Trump will launch an invasion of Mexico, turning his slow Russian-backed civil war in America into a full-blown hot war. And the irony that Republicans want to deport Latinos when they have the potential to strengthen the Republican base. That discussion is available to our Patreon subscribers at the Truth Teller level or higher. Be sure to join our community at Patreon to hear the full bonus episode at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. Thank you to all of our Democracy Defender supporters for your questions. If you do not hear your question answered, look out for it soon as the Gaslit Nation Q&A continues. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.